Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Boost Bureau, where we dive deep into the stories that shape the machines we admire, the decisions that define them, and the impact they left on the culture of speed and design. Today, we're taking on a legend that didn't just win races or sell motorcycles, it changed what people thought a superbike could be. In 1994, Ducati unveiled the 916, a machine so stunning, so purposeful, and so dominant that it marked a turning point for both the company and the wider motorcycling world. The Ducati 916 wasn't born into an era of comfort for the Italian brand. Ducati had been fighting for survival throughout the 1980s, with financial instability casting a shadow over its racing successes. The 851 and 888 had brought the company back into competitive relevance, but the motorcycle market was shifting fast. Japanese manufacturers were flooding the scene with affordable, technologically advanced superbikes that seemed nearly impossible to match. Ducati needed more than another competent racer. It needed a halo machine that could secure its legacy and redefine its identity. The 916 was exactly that. At first glance, it was the work of art that stopped motorcycle fans in their tracks. Its sculpted bodywork, underseat exhaust, and impossibly sleek stance didn't just look futuristic, they made every other superbike seem old overnight. But the story isn't only about beauty. Underneath that design was a chassis honed for racing dominance, an evolution of the V-twin engine with desmodromic valves that carried Ducati's engineering DNA, and a package tuned not just to compete with the Japanese giants, but to set new standards. What makes this story fascinating is that the Ducati 916 wasn't just one person's vision or a simple market response. It was the intersection of financial desperation, inspired design genius, and a racing program that demanded nothing less than world-class results. The stakes were enormous. If the 916 failed, Ducati risked sliding back into obscurity. But if it succeeded, it could elevate the brand into mythic status. Across the next stretch, we'll explore how the 916 was conceived and why its design philosophy was so radical, how it transformed from concept to a race-winning powerhouse, and how its legacy continues to ripple through the motorcycle industry today. By the end of this journey, you'll see why the Ducati 916 is remembered not just as a motorcycle, but as a revolution on two wheels, a machine that turned engineering into art and racing victories into legend. The Ducati 916 emerged in a moment when style and performance were colliding in the motorcycle world, but few realized how deliberately this machine was crafted to embody both. To understand its journey, we have to step back to the late 1980s and early 1990s, when Ducati's financial footing was fragile and its future far from secure. The company had scored racing victories with the 851 and 888, but those machines were stepping stones, not icons. What Ducati needed was something more, a machine that could reset public perception, dominate in competition, and finally give the brand a clear identity beyond its loyal niche. Micro story. The man at the center of the 916's creation was Massimo Tamburini, a designer with a reputation for brilliance who worked under the Cagiva Research Center, which oversaw Ducati at the time. Tamburini had already built a career on balancing form and function, but with the 916, he pushed himself into new territory. Inspired by both aeronautics and the simple elegance of Italian design, he sculpted a motorcycle that looked impossibly modern while cleverly packaging racing necessities. The underseat exhaust wasn't just eye-catching, it centralized weight and improved aerodynamics. The narrow fairing wasn't just sleek, it gave the bike a razor-sharp profile that minimized drag. Tamburini wanted the bike to be beautiful, but never at the expense of performance, and that philosophy would define everything that followed. Context digest. At this time, the Japanese superbikes, the Honda Fireblade, Yamaha YZF, Kawasaki, Ninja, and Suzuki GSX-R were setting the pace in the marketplace. They offered incredible horsepower numbers, innovative materials, and competitive prices. Ducati couldn't compete in a straight numbers game, so it needed to differentiate. The 916 would become that differentiation. Instead of following the horsepower race, Ducati doubled down on handling, design, and exclusivity. That strategic choice wasn't obvious at the time, but it ultimately redefined what superbike buyers would expect. Micro story. When the 916 was first revealed at the Milan Motorcycle Show in 1993, the audience reaction was electric. People gasped, not just at the radical exhaust placement and flowing lines, but at how cohesive it all looked. Unlike other sport bikes, which seemed bolted together from multiple engineering departments, the 916 appeared to be sculpted from a single block of imagination. Ducati had finally delivered a motorcycle that didn't look like a compromise. The press declared it a masterpiece, and potential buyers instantly lined up. This was not just another superbike, it was a statement of intent. Reflection bridge. A beautiful motorcycle alone wouldn't be enough. Ducati's credibility rested on proving that the 916 could dominate on the racetrack. Micro story. That test came in the World Superbike Championship. Ducati's weapon would be the 916-powered race machine, piloted by Carl Fogarty, a rider whose aggressive style perfectly matched the motorcycle's precision. In 1994, the 916 stormed the championship, with Fogarty taking victory after victory. The bike wasn't the most powerful on the grid, but its balance, agility, and relentless traction gave it an edge. Ducati had found its perfect partnership between rider and machine, and the results stunned both fans and rivals. The 916 wasn't just gorgeous, it was deadly effective. Context digest. Winning in World Superbike mattered in a way casual fans might not immediately recognize. Unlike Grand Prix racing, where prototypes reigned, World Superbike was built around production-derived machines. That meant success on the track directly boosted sales in showrooms. Ducati's dominance with the 916 was a marketing dream. The same machine that dazzled fans at a race weekend could be bought and ridden on the street. Suddenly, Ducati's identity shifted from boutique Italian brand to global contender. Micro story. Fogarty's success with the 916 carried emotional weight too. He wasn't a polished corporate figure. He was raw, intense, and unrelenting. When paired with the elegance of the 916, the contrast was irresistible. Fans saw the bike as an extension of his personality and vice versa. Each championship trophy brought Ducati closer to mythic status, and by the end of the mid-1990s, the 916 had become the face of an entirely new chapter for the company. Reflection bridge. Yet dominance in racing only told part of the story. The 916's true impact reached far beyond the track into culture, design, and the way motorcycles were marketed. Micro story. The bike quickly became a cultural icon. It appeared in films, on posters, and in garages where owners treated it less like a vehicle and more like a piece of art. Collectors saw it as the Ferrari of motorcycles, a machine that could elevate any garage. Young riders who couldn't afford, it still cut out magazine photos and taped them to walls, dreaming of one day owning a 916. Even in a decade filled with loud design statements, the 916 stood apart as a piece of machinery that carried cultural weight. Context digest. In many ways, the 916 redefined the value proposition of a superbike. It wasn't the fastest in a straight line, and it wasn't the cheapest, but it was the most desirable. Ducati had discovered that exclusivity and emotion could compete with mass-market horsepower figures. This shift forced other manufacturers to rethink their strategies. Suddenly, aesthetics and brand cachet mattered as much as dyno results. Micro story. Behind the glamour, though, Ducati was still a company under pressure. Building the 916 to such high standards strained resources, and the expectation of continued racing dominance created immense stress on the engineering teams. Every season brought new rivals from Japan, and every update to the 916 had to keep the dream alive. Yet somehow Ducati continued refining the formula, producing evolutions that kept the 916 family competitive well into the late 1990s. The burden of success was heavy, but it forged Ducati into a sharper, more confident brand. And as the story of the 916 pushed Ducati into a golden era, it also raised a deeper question. What would this revolution mean for the superbike world as a whole, and how would it set the stage for what came next? The Ducati 916's revolution in the mid-1990s did not stay confined to the race paddock or showroom floors. Its ripple effect began reshaping the very landscape of superbike culture worldwide. What started as a daring Italian gamble soon became a standard other manufacturers had to measure themselves against. This phase of the story is not just about Ducati's wins, but about how the motorcycle industry responded, how enthusiasts redefined their expectations, and how design and technology began merging in ways that would shape the decades to come. Micro story. In Japan, the big four manufacturers couldn't ignore the impact of the 916. Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki had built reputations on reliability, performance, and accessibility. But suddenly they looked cautious compared to Ducati's boldness. Honda, for example, responded with the RC51, a V-twin designed specifically to challenge Ducati's dominance in world superbike. This was extraordinary. Honda had built its empire on inline-4 power plants, yet the 916 forced even the largest motorcycle company in the world to change its formula. The 916 had shifted the rules of engagement. Context digest. What Ducati had really accomplished was a rebalancing of values in motorcycling. It was no longer enough for a superbike to hit record top speeds or lap times. Buyers wanted design sophistication, emotional resonance, and a sense of exclusivity. Ducati proved that people would pay more, even sacrifice some practicality, to own a motorcycle that stirred the soul as much as it thrilled on the road. This new hierarchy of values trickled down to other brands, sparking a wave of design-led sport bikes. Micro story. The 916 also redefined how motorcycles were presented to the public. Advertisements no longer focused solely on technical, charts and performance data. Instead, Ducati leaned into the artistry of the machine. Promotional materials showed the 916 lit like a sculpture, curves highlighted like a fine Italian car. Ducati knew what it had created was not just transportation, it was an object of desire. The result was that superbikes started appearing in lifestyle magazines, design exhibitions, and conversations far outside traditional motorcycle circles. Reflection bridge. This cross-pollination between engineering and art transformed the 916 from a motorcycle into a symbol, one that bridged cultural worlds in unexpected ways. Micro story. Perhaps nowhere was the 916's crossover appeal more visible than in its appearances in film and television. When the 916 appeared on screen, it wasn't just background scenery, it was framed as a star in its own right. Audiences saw it as shorthand for danger, style, and sophistication. The association with pop culture solidified the 916's place. As more than a machine for enthusiasts, it became a cultural icon. Collectors, celebrities, and even those with no prior interest in motorcycles suddenly knew its silhouette. Context digest. Behind the glamour, however, Ducati continued refining and iterating. The 916 spawned the 996 and 998, each evolution squeezing more power and refining the chassis without losing the essence of the original. This continuity mattered because it created a lineage, allowing owners and fans to see themselves as part of an unfolding legacy. Unlike mass-market competitors that released entirely new models every few years, Ducati built an identity around continuity and refinement, which made each new release feel like a chapter in an ongoing epic. Micro story. Racing success also continued to fuel this cultural expansion. Fogarty's repeated championships on the 916 platform and later successors created heroes who carried Ducati's banner. In Europe, Fogarty was celebrated like a rock star, and Ducati leveraged his victories to cultivate brand loyalty that went beyond mere admiration. Fans weren't just supporting a rider, they were buying into the mythology of Ducati itself, embodied most clearly in the 916's lines and victories. Reflection bridge. Yet while Ducati basked in the glow of cultural and competitive dominance, a looming challenge remained. How could the company sustain the magic of the 916 without being trapped by its own success? Micro story. By the late 1990s, the 916 was approaching the limit of its design envelope. Rivals were catching up in horsepower and electronics, and the need for stricter emissions compliance was beginning to reshape engineering priorities. Ducati engineers faced the difficult task of preserving the 916's magic while preparing for the future. The 996 and 998 stretched the design brilliantly, but everyone knew a generational shift was coming. The 916's legend had created enormous pressure. Whatever came next had to live up to a masterpiece. Context digest. This is where the 916's true importance becomes clear. Its influence wasn't limited to Ducati's catalog. The motorcycle world had been reoriented to take design and brand storytelling as seriously as performance. Rivals weren't just competing with Ducati on track. They were competing with the myth of the 916 in the minds of riders. That psychological edge gave Ducati a unique position, almost like a luxury fashion brand whose products carried intangible value. Microstory. Within Bologna, Ducati's headquarters began to treat the 916 as both an engineering project and a cultural artifact. Museums dedicated space to it. Marketing leaned heavily on its imagery. Even as new models rolled out, the ghost of the 916 remained in every line, every design sketch. Engineers spoke of it as a benchmark, and designers found themselves measuring new ideas against Tamburini's masterpiece. The 916 wasn't just a bike in the lineup anymore, it was the soul of the company, crystallized. And as Ducati moved into the 2000s with the 996 and eventually the 999, the question hung heavy. Would the company's future prove that the 916 was a foundation to build on, or an impossible act to follow? The Ducati 916's shadow loomed large into the 2000s, and with it came both opportunity and risk. Having redefined what a superbike could be, Ducati now faced the challenge of evolution. The world was changing. Emissions regulations tightened. Electronics began creeping into superbike design, and rivals were advancing at a blistering pace. The 916's successors, the 996 and 998, carried the torch successfully, but eventually the inevitable happened. Ducati unveiled the 999, a motorcycle that dared to break from the 916's sculpted beauty. Microstory. The 999 was a bold move, designed by Pierre Terblanche, and it looked radically different from the 916. Ducati argued it was more advanced aerodynamically and ergonomically, but the market response was mixed. Riders who had fallen in love with Tamburini's flowing lines weren't ready to abandon them. While the 999 won races and proved capable, its design polarized fans. It became clear that the 916 wasn't just another successful product, it had become the reference point against which all future Ducatis would be judged. Context digest. This backlash revealed something deeper. The 916 had transcended functionality to become an emotional anchor for Ducati enthusiasts. Customers weren't only buying performance, they were buying into a mythology. When the 999 deviated from that mythology, the resistance showed just how deeply the 916 had embedded itself in Ducati's identity. That kind of legacy is rare in motorcycling, where constant change is often the norm. Microstory. Despite the controversy, Ducati never abandoned the lessons of the 916. The company returned to design cues that echoed Tamburini's vision in later models like the 1098 and 1198, blending modern engineering with the emotional lines that fans demanded. In many ways, the 916 had taught Ducati that design could be just as critical as racing performance, and ignoring that truth risked alienating its most loyal supporters. The 1098's release was hailed as a return to form, and it demonstrated the long arc of influence that the 916 maintained. Reflection bridge. The legacy of the 916 wasn't simply in Ducati's own lineup. It reshaped the entire culture of motorcycling, influencing competitors and collectors alike. Microstory. As the years passed, the 916 became one of the most collectible superbikes of all time. Well-preserved examples began fetching prices far above their original MSRP, and museums dedicated prime space to showcase them. Owners treated their 916s not just as motorcycles, but as heirlooms, maintaining them meticulously and passing them down across generations. This collector culture reinforced the idea that the 916 was not just an artifact of the 1990s, but a permanent fixture in the pantheon of iconic machines. Context Digest. Even outside of ownership, the 916's influence was felt. Its design language bled into fashion, advertising, and even product design far removed from motorcycles. The idea that a piece of engineering could also be high art gained traction, thanks in large part to the way the 916 was received. Motorcycle shows around the world began highlighting design as much as engineering, a shift that can be traced back to Ducati's mid-90s revolution. Microstory. And in the racing world, the 916's DNA lived on through Ducati's continued V-twin dominance. Although regulations eventually shifted and V-twins faced new restrictions, the philosophy of using handling, traction, and balance as competitive weapons remained. Ducati's superbike program continued to harvest championships, always under the long shadow of the machine that first gave it legitimacy. Even as electronics and aerodynamics grew in importance, the underlying blueprint of the 916 remained visible: reflection bridge. With time, the Ducati 916 story became less about immediate competition and more about cultural immortality, a rare achievement for any motorcycle. Microstory. By the 2010s, the 916 was celebrated in retrospectives across the industry. Journalists, designers, and riders consistently ranked it among the most important motorcycles ever made. Its silhouette appeared on posters decades after its release, and younger generations still recognized it as a symbol of passion and daring. This continuity across time showed just how thoroughly the 916 had captured the imagination of not just Ducati fans, but motorcyclists everywhere. Context Digest. What makes the 916's impact so extraordinary is that it succeeded on multiple fronts simultaneously. It saved a struggling company, dominated a world championship, and redefined the design language of an entire industry. Few motorcycles before or since have managed to balance those achievements. That is why, even in an age of electronically managed superbikes, the 916 remains untouchable in its aura. Microstory. Today, whenever Ducati releases a new superbike, journalists and fans inevitably ask the same question: is it the next 916? The fact that every successor is measured against a motorcycle introduced in 1994 tells you everything you need to know about its enduring significance. Tamburini's masterpiece did more than win trophies. It reprogrammed the way we think about motorcycles. Its influence stretches across time, connecting past, present, and future. And so, the Ducati 916 closes its story not as a machine trapped in history, but as a living reference point. Proof that sometimes a motorcycle can become a revolution that never really ends. The Ducati 916 stands today as one of those rare machines that bridged engineering, art, and emotion in a way the world had never seen before. When it first appeared in 1994, it was a lifeline for Ducati, a company in need of a breakthrough. But it became far more than that. It transformed the way superbikes were built, marketed, and remembered. From Massimo Tamburini's daring design choices to Carl Fogarty's relentless victories on the racetrack, the 916 proved that performance and beauty could coexist without compromise. It forced rivals to change direction, inspired countless designers, and carved out a cultural identity that extended far beyond motorcycles. The legacy of the 916 is not measured only in trophies or sales figures. It's measured in the way it reshaped expectations. It proved that motorcycles could be aspirational objects, more akin to fine art than simple machines, while still delivering the raw thrill of speed and control. It taught Ducati the value of consistency, continuity, and identity. And it gave motorcycling a symbol that continues to be recognized decades later, even by people who may never twist a throttle. For enthusiasts, the 916 remains an icon of possibility. It showed that a motorcycle could carry meaning, that it could represent a company's survival, a designer's vision, a rider's triumph, and an era's taste all at once. Few machines ever achieve that balance, which is why the 916 continues to command respect whether parked in a museum, carving through a mountain road, or displayed proudly in a collector's garage. To this day, the silhouette of the 916 serves as a reminder that design and engineering can create something timeless when executed with passion and precision. It is not just nostalgia that keeps the 916 relevant. It's the fact that every new superbike, from Ducati or otherwise, still competes with the standard it set. In that sense, the revolution it began never ended. Thanks for riding with us on Boost Bureau. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.